Well, this is an absolute pleasure. Austin and Jeff together. I'm really honored to get a chance to sit down with you both and have a conversation. I'm actually hoping I'm just going to fire a couple of questions and just leave it to you both. Two of the smartest people I've ever met, and to get you together is incredible. So I'll start with you, Jeff. How are you?
Awesome. Thanks.
Good. Okay. Are you well, Austin?
Incredibly well. Actually feeling just a lot of sense of gratitude, just given, especially just recent events. Jeff and I had the opportunity to be down in El Salvador, and it was just, an incredible contrast to a lot of my expectations. And at the same time, you can't help but walk away and just, get a dose of just how blessed and how privileged we are. And,
Well, I'm excited to talk to you both about El Salvador. I've been 5 or 6 times now over the space of a couple of years, a range of different experiences, and I love the country. I love the pupusas. I love the people. It's not exactly. I don't think it's always exactly what people expect. But I'm interested to get your perspectives. Both your first time?
Yeah,
first time in El Salvador. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And you agreed to go together?
Yeah.
Spend some time down there, meet some people. Were Max and Stacy down there?
Yeah, we did an event down there with them.
Okay, so start with you, Jeff. How do you sum up your experience?
Yeah, so Austin just said it. I've traveled a lot of the world, and so I've been to many third world countries and or emerging countries, and it was that. But in all of those experiences, and El Salvador was no different. What you realize is what you hear in the news is very different than the experience on the ground. People all over the world are similar to you and I. Same hopes, dreams for a better future. And when you're actually meeting people on the ground and spending time with them in small villages or wherever, you just realize just tons of beautiful people that are trapped in a system that doesn't exactly look like that. And in El Salvador, I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners that think, okay, Bitcoin's everywhere there, and it's really early, and it's experiment. It's tons of hope for the country, but also there's a lot of people even in government that don't know how fast or what's going to happen here, and so it's early there. A lot of people are trying to find their way there, and so yes. McDonald's takes it, Starbucks takes it, all the big chains take it. But some of the smaller places, and especially outside El Zonte, don't yet. And I wouldn't say we went to schools that were learning it. I went to a Bitcoin meetup where you saw a guy he calls him, you probably know him, Bitcoin Taxi, and he's created a business, and now he employs 3 other people as Bitcoin Taxi because so it's changed his life. And so when you start to see that, you can't come away from that and not kind of see hope and where this takes the country. But it is still really early.
Yeah, I mean, hope's it's like a profound word for the experience you have there, because it isn't what you expect. You have this expectation you can get there, and everyone's accepting Bitcoin, understands that they don't, but you discover these little stories of people there's a guy down in Zonte who he saved a bit of Bitcoin early on, and he ended up getting his teeth done. I don't know if you met him. The old guy with the cowboy hat.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I always forget his name. But you see these little pockets of stories, and you read, okay, there's some hope here. There's something for the future. How about yourself, Austin? What was the experience like for you?
So I've been living in kind of Latin America the last couple of years. Certainly every Latin American country is very different. But I think all of them are suffering from some of the consequences of being very dependent on the US dollar and petrodollar as their kind of base reserve currency, whether or not it was officially adopted, like in El Salvador, the US dollar peg, or not. So I've certainly seen the effect that the pandemic and, the money printing has had on economies that I've visited. Seeing it in El Salvador was really different in the sense that Jeff talks about hope. We were talking about this idea of like hope. A lot of the hope I've seen in other places in Latin America, or the hopelessness, was tied to just an institutional belief that our lot in life will never change, or a very kind of misdirected, kind of just general sense of hope, whether that comes from religion, family, things can always be worse, but at least we have each other type, like very generalized hope. This was the first time you actually, when I talked to people, as we said, students, people in the streets, you ask them, how do you feel? And the answers were almost consistently, I'm hopeful for the first time. And I would go a little deeper and say, what's made you hopeful? Sometimes they knew we were involved in Bitcoin, sometimes didn't want to broadcast it at all. And the stories had a very, very common theme, very much tied to, a little bit of skepticism, but tons of hopefulness that this time it's different. And that was tied to how gangs were being treated, how the crackdown on violence was being done. A lot of hope that Bukele and his administration live up to the promise, but, some healthy skepticism. But, when you went and talked to the children, we were in a school that was K to 12. The school went from 100 students last year to 825 this year. Because so many parents have re-enrolled their kids where they didn't before. They had pulled their kids out of school and they were working in markets. They were working in family-owned businesses. And the school has now exploded. We asked him, how many do you lose to gangs? He said, since February, around 10% of the entire student body I lost to gangs. And he said, and we were like, is it economic? Is it peer pressure? Are they being forced? And he said, it's pure economics. He said, one of the students, it was, I guess, two brothers. Their mother got cancer. They left school, worked for the gangs. Their mother died. They came back to school. And so, you're talking to these kids and you're asking, we went into the classrooms and we just asked, what's your favorite social network? And they're just like every other child. It's TikTok. It's WhatsApp. What's your favorite music app? I'm into SoundCloud, So, you see the power of TCP/IP as this unifying force that has brought this kind of sense of equality and hope. But they do not have the same, when we talk about Bitcoin, I like to use the analogy of snakes and ladders. But the system as it's designed, the board game, has nothing but broken ladders. Right? Like, it's impossible to climb up, but you can definitely slide down. This is a country who's finally seeing a few ladders that work, and they're desperately just trying to land on that spot. And so when you ask them, like, what do you hope to be when you grow up? It's like graphic designer, and they're showing you their skills with Photoshop. And you just realize, you pair that with a little bit of education. What's your favorite video game? Roblox. There's so much potential there, and untapped human potential, that I think a little bit of resources and a little bit of opportunity creates this outsized outcome. And that's what led me very hopeful for what I saw.
Depending on when this goes out, we'll probably have to let people know and kind of timestamp it. But there is definitely some challenges with the administration there right now. And this is something I've been fully conscious of, is that are we at risk sometimes of putting too much hope, too much pressure on what is a government and what is an administration that could essentially bring a risk to Bitcoin. And part of me has some real empathy for Bukele with a gang situation where he has been accused of doing deals with the gangs to try and reduce violence. And now he's in a situation where he's trying to clamp down on the gangs and he's receiving criticism. Whatever solution he tries, he seems to receive some criticism. I have a massive amount of empathy there. Are you okay talking about your experience while you were there? Because you went there on the day martial law was announced.
And so let's get into that. And I think I gave it a talk to the YPO group there.
Okay.
In San Salvador, and the YPO group, old money, typically very against Bukele. The owner of the main newspaper there, very against Bukele and rights and freedoms, and so much so that he's like, how dare you lock up people with no trial or anything else? So, and he asked me after again, because he's so against Bukele, and the whole group they were against Bitcoin, and so there's a whole part of the audience that is very against Bitcoin and the wealthy of El Salvador. And I broke through that group. But one of the things that he asked me, he said, what is the worst thing about Bitcoin? Name the worst thing about Bitcoin? And I said, you have to accept that people you dislike completely are on it too, and they make the network stronger. And over time, there's actually nothing that Bukele can do to hurt Bitcoin. It will keep on emerging, and he makes it stronger by bringing a whole bunch of people on. And then that network will expand, and it'll make the people stronger. And if he doesn't do what the people want, he will be ousted. That's what, and you could say that it's probably the most misunderstood thing about Bitcoin, because people trap their own beliefs about a person, hero or villain, and they attach that to the network, and it's completely independent.
My experience when I was there the last time filming was there were anti-Bitcoin protests, but they were really anti-Bukele protests. I made the point, if he'd have banned Bitcoin, they'd have all been protesting for it.
Yeah. So that's the point in this, and you know this, in this network, it doesn't actually matter who you are. Every additional voice and making it stronger is bringing us on more and more people, and makes the entire network stronger. And that network change from one system that cannot work anymore to a new system that can, actually puts people in control. A peer-to-peer network, the people are more in control, and the government loses power as a result. So he could be a narcissistic leader. He might not be, he might be. I don't know him personally, but I know he made Bitcoin better, and he's making Bitcoin better by bringing, and as a result, he's going to make a whole bunch of his people, how many people take hold of it and drive that out, how much business comes out of new Bitcoin startups out of that creates real wealth in the country. And that's a feeling of hope. So you have to dismiss that personal attack, whatever side you're on, from Bitcoin, the network.
So my experience, obviously, I share a lot of Jeff's views, especially when it comes to like Bitcoin and the pros and cons. I had a little bit of a contrasting experience. I landed there with my fiance on Saturday. They had declared martial law. We were driving to El Zonte, and I've traveled in dangerous countries before, so I take certain security precautions. I'm taking pictures of the license plates. I've notified, Jeff and some security backup teams I have, in terms of, like, if necessary, deploy KNR insurance and come find me. You just never know, right? And while that kind of cautionary, like, oh my God, what have I got myself into, and the worry can run rampant, I also, just flat out asked one of the security drivers we had, I was like, how do you feel? I mean, it obviously was a really rough week. And he was like, I'm so hopeful. And I was like, really, what makes you hopeful? I mean, he told me the story. He said, 6 years ago, I shot 2 gang members while on the job.
Wow.
Protecting his
clients.
Jesus.
He goes, I was sent to prison for 4 days, and I was waiting to die. And it was only because my security company decided to bail me out that I didn't end up in the main prison, where I would be killed by the gangs for killing those 2 gang members. He goes, so I barely escaped dying. And he goes, every day since coming to work, ever since then, I've lived in fear that if I ever was faced in that decision, would I let my clients get killed, or would I put me and my family at risk? He goes, the Bukeles have now made self-defense the standard. So if I shoot a bunch of gang members defending my clients, I'm not afraid of going to prison. He goes, so it's open season on criminals, as it should be, because they're a scorched to our country. Now, as a peace and love Canadian hippie, very blessed child who was not exposed to that level of violence, it can be shocking. My answer wants to be kumbaya. Someone pulls a gun and I want to give them let's hug it out, right? But that's just not the reality of the environment. And it's a very blessed and very, frankly, naive point of view in how do you deal with the real world violence that he has grown up in. And so, that contrast is very vivid. But for him, the changes that are being made and the idea that criminals got thrown in jail without any trial is absolutely a blessing. For me, who believes, there's a famous quote that peace is not the absence of violence. It's actually the absence of, it's when you have the absence of justice. So only the reestablishment of justice with no violence can actually lead to peace, right? So you look at an environment like that where there's systemic multi-generational violence, where the economic problems and frankly a lot of the problems that were in some regards not necessarily their own, right?
Well, the gangs came from the US.
Well, games came from a lot of the other countries and were exported. Some of the economic sovereignty that they sought at various stages was essentially stolen from them through a foreign policy that required them to be a debtor nation, that it required through IMF loans and through selling off of their major industries that turned their citizens into essentially slave workers.
This is a really important point, really, because a lot of people look at they don't look at the cause. They look at the gangs. They get scared of the gangs and say that's a terrible country. All of those people are terrible, and they don't realize the kid that came out of school to save his mom had no other choice, no other economic choice to come out of school but to join a gang. And if they were in the same situation, they would too. They judge the cause is an economic disparity. The cause of all of that is when people can't make it, and they try to and so they turn to gangs because it's a way that they can make it.
Also, trying to understand the level of violence is hard to comprehend, I think, for some people who have never lived around this kind of level of violence. My friends John and Danielle run a project in San Salvador, which is they help get people who are addicted to drugs, alcohol off the street and protect them. But they also help with kids, and they also help with sex workers. And my last visit with them it had a profound effect on me because they told me an example of a situation you have why people maybe flee the country. They said one example was one of the gang members had identified a young girl who has become his girlfriend in the gang. She was 12 years old. And she said what they will do, they go to the family and they say, give me your daughter or we're going to kill all of you. And if they don't give the daughter, they said they will kill them all. And so what happens is the family have a choice is to hand over the daughter or flee or stay and die. They're not going to choose stay and die. And often the girl will get taken. She's a 12-year-old and she will be raped and abused continually. And I think a lot of people can't comprehend that level of violence that exists.
And obviously a horrible story.
Yeah.
But you look at a number of other impoverished nations around the world, whether it was the rise of ISIS and ISIS brides, whether or not it was in other places. And when you go do root cause analysis and you actually go to first principles, you realize a huge part of the rise of ISIS was actually came from the famine in Syria that drove everyone from their rural environments into the cities and forced this economic and climate, some would say climate related, some will say it's just the world doing what the world does. Whatever you side your argument, the reality was there was a drought. The drought caused people to migrate. That migration forced the breakdown and the structure of very small family, close-knit rural structures and put them in a hostile environment where they were exposed to new criminal elements that they had no ability to fight back. Now, this has been institutionalized over multiple generations. So the norm and the acceptance of the norm just becomes something you start to live with, right?
Yeah.
And, the same way we've now gone 30 or 40 years without the idea of a country invades another country and everyone wakes up shocked that Russia would ever do this in Ukraine. It's like, okay, that's a very privileged point of view. If you actually study history, you realize that the writing was on the wall for a very long time, that Russia was very, very clear. And there's a whole bunch of foreign policy messes and choices and consequences and economic and, fight over resources and energy that led to this. And that's not to assign blame to anyone. The blame is obviously on a very, what I think most people would recognize as a hostile, irrational leader who is using the weapons of the past to enact a dream of the past, which is to be the USSR. But in each of these cases, you can actually go back to first principles and look at the acceptance of violence or the acceptance of some of these violations of what we take for granted. Human rights don't come easily. They actually have to be fought for fought for with encryption, fought for with principled individuals, fought for with giving people other alternatives. And the best alternative is economic sovereignty.
Well, there's a really interesting point with that. So when I was looking into the reports where came out that there were secret meetings within the prison between Bukele's administration and the gangs. And one of the things that really stood out to me was as part of the negotiation and I don't know how much of this is true, but part of the negotiation for to reduce the killings amongst the gangs was the request from the gangs for jobs for the gang members.
It's all economic.
Yeah.
So a lot of root cause analysis that we think we don't change our minds. We think we couldn't be because we live in a certain world, we're not capable of those other things. If you couldn't eat, if you couldn't feed your family, you would turn to whatever you could. You'd steal, you'd do it. And so all of this stuff, I think even Jordan Peterson talks about it the wrong way around. And he's fantastic on all of our beliefs in our mind and how they're all stories. But those are created from economics.
Incentive design, people, there's mass amounts of psychology, the human brain, pleasure reward centers, what we're learning about neurology, whether or not that's in addiction or whether or not that's pain avoidance. That Maslow hierarchy of needs where your basic safety, and then you move into sustenance, and then you move up to community, love, self-actualization. Those aren't just abstract concepts, but when you actually break them down into how the brain works, how we react to stress, how we make decisions, you can trace so many of those things back to incentive design. And so much of that gets lost. So, we had talked about previously, and I know this is something Jeff and I have talked a lot about the idea that, what if you could orange pill 5 or 6 American cities? We talked about some of the ideas on this.
Mm-hmm.
So in one of the recent discussions I had with some friends who are working on this, so just for people who hadn't listened, the idea is, could you take a city of anywhere from 25,000, 50,000, all the way up to maybe 750 or 1 million people, and actually orange pill the entire city, funded in part by bonds, like what El Salvador is doing, right? So if the city passes certain Bitcoin-friendly laws, there could be grants, essentially under something called a zero coupon bond, which is how they fund usually municipal, like water projects, recycling plants, where there's 25-year balloon payment at the end. So could you actually do that by creating a Bitcoin incentive bond where every citizen who moves, stays, and becomes a productive member of society can actually earn Bitcoin, and almost like we designed the Blockstream incentive bond for all our employees, there's a vesting schedule and you design an incentive system. And so one of the candidate cities that we were talking to actually said, okay, we're going to do it, but we want a sister city to do it. And the sister city we want has the largest prison in the state. And we want to include the Bitcoin bond for all prisoners.
Interesting.
They're like, we want to give Bitcoin, vested Bitcoin, to every prisoner. So if they're model prisoner, they get parole, they stay off drugs, they get a job. At the end of 7 years, they actually get a Bitcoin just like every other citizen who resides in the city. Because these guys so believe that incentive design can actually create positive incentives. And if prisoners know I can get out of prison and actually maybe be able to actually buy a house or be able to reform myself, there is a path back from where I was to salvation. They believe that that's actually a worthwhile thing for the community and society.
Well, this is what Schellenberger has discussed a lot with the issues in San Francisco. He's talked about the incentives. There is no incentive for people to give up drugs.
Yeah.
There's no incentive. If you overdose, you're picked up by an ambulance, you're resuscitated, you're put back on the street, and you're refinanced.
There's no incentive not to break into a car. There are literally street signs saying, welcome to a car break-in neighborhood. Please don't leave anything in your car because we do not report car break-ins. So it's like literally an advertisement on the street.
It happened to us when we had dinner. Well, our window was smashed in. But he was saying the problem is the way you need to change this. You need to change the incentive model. There needs to be a structure in place where if you're an addict and you've overdosed, you have two choices. You can either go into recovery or you can go into jail. It's one of the two. He said then you give people a reason to work on themselves. But these incentives, they don't exist.
But the incentive design of the entire economic system,
Yeah,
the fiat system, is opposite to what will happen.
of course.
Right. And that incentive is driving everything else. So when you look through the lens and you see the world is getting more polarized, it's designed to get more polarized. It's designed, if you knew I can make more money at the top of this system, whether I go into politics or whatever, to be able to make more money, or essentially socialize losses if I'm too big to fail, then you're going to do more of that for your share of more of the world. And then as you do that, and society just gets ripped apart. They don't see that there's somebody on the ground in El Salvador on the other side of that bet joining a gang. They don't see it at all. They say, well, I won my bet. And they don't see that incentive. That incentive design all around the world is changing in Bitcoin, and there's nothing that can stop it.
And this is something interesting Jeff and I talked about at our event. People think that because digital scarcity exists, that the idea that Bitcoin is a zero-sum game. And it's actually not, right? Because the growth of Bitcoin, the size of it as a lifeboat, I use this analogy. This is why sometimes I don't judge how anyone becomes a Bitcoiner. Bitcoin is for everyone, and everyone's going to enjoy Bitcoin, spread it, use their evangelism to their right. I, for a very long time, have kind of shied away from some of I love the meme cultures. I laugh at memes. I enjoy them. But some of the memes that I feel are like punching down, right? I use the example of have fun staying poor. I use the analogy of if I see someone drowning, I'm never going to sit there and say, have fun drowning. You had a chance to get a lifeboat. Aren't you dumb? That's just not within my humanity, right? Like, I'm going to look at them and say, oh my God, how do we get them on the lifeboat?
Exactly.
How do we make enough room for them? And every one of us Jeff talks about Bitcoin being good for your enemies, or you have to accept that your enemies may use it, people you hate, and it makes you stronger. That is increasing the size of the lifeboat. Everyone, good, bad, people you agree with, people you disagree with. And we want the lifeboat to be as big as possible with as much air and as much resistance to sinking as possible. Because if everyone is going to drown, those of us who are in those lifeboats are going to get dragged under with them. Jeff uses the analogy, and it was one of the earliest comments he gave when we were getting to know each other. Show me one point in history when you could build walls big enough to keep the haves from the have-nots. And, if Titanic is going down, the people who are cheering for it and can't wait for it, thinking, I've got my lifeboat and who cares about the rest, are kind of ignorant of history. I mean, when the Titanic went down, you could have been the richest guy or the poorest. There was no guarantee that your lifeboat wasn't going to get toppled by a bunch of people struggling to get onto the lifeboat.
Well, this is why I'm not a huge fan of the Citadel discussions, because for me, the Citadel discussion feels like an idea around those who have managed to accumulate enough wealth, get to move into a walled garden and escape.
It wouldn't work.
Well, it wouldn't work, but it's also I feel like it's an idea based around privilege, and that's not to say people in there haven't worked hard and accumulated wealth honestly, but it still feels like let's escape from the collective issues in society as an individualist, and I'll go and position myself with my guns and my wealth away from everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, aside from functionally, it won't work because we talked about this in our discussion about singularity tech and the asymmetric abilities of new technologies. So, a person's ability to actually protect against, like, I can build still gates. Great. Still gates don't work anymore because of drones, because of plasma torches, because of this, because of that. So I put up some new energy grid with my fission nuclear reactor that I invested in. Great. That's not going to hold up against some guy who has new tunneling tech. So it's just like this cat and mouse game that will never, ever, ever give you the security that you want. And the investment of that, frankly, just doesn't lead to happiness. When you're constantly looking and saying, who is going to take my stuff away from me? Because there's this massive divide between those who have and those who have not.
Yeah.
Does not, in my mind, lead to happiness. You can have all the, eggs from the farm, But if you're, the single chicken surrounded by foxes,
Well,
it doesn't lead to a lot of, good quality eggs. You are not laying good quality eggs. You're waiting to be eaten.
Well, this is why I've been recently exploring this idea of freedom and really trying to understand. Like, when some people were claiming they're not free, or they've got a pursuit of freedom, I'm trying to understand what that really means for people. I'm often a defender of democracy, and I know all its flaws, but the response can often be that I'm a statist, used as a pejorative. But what I'm actually trying to understand is, like, what do you mean by what is the freedom you don't have that you want? Do you want absolute liberty, but to, like you say, have to have the correct or the right amount of weaponry, or accumulate the right amount of guns to protect yourself, always looking over your shoulder? I think we've done a lot in Western liberal democracies over centuries to fight for the freedoms we have, and we have it pretty good. And I'm like, you have pretty good property rights in the UK and in the US. You live in a pretty safe society, fairly. What is this next level freedom that you want? Because I look around the rest of the world and I see, like, Gladstein quotes that 500 million people live under authoritarian rule.
Gladstein's incredible on this.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about what is some of their tests on whether or not you live in a free society, right? Can you go to a gay pride parade?
Yeah.
Can you make a career insulting your leader?
Yeah.
And make $1 million, right? Like, these are some of their tests that they use to decide, do you live in a free society? And people have asked him, and I've seen him talk very eloquently about, a lot of what people think are the lack of freedoms, cancel culture, the cultural divide, the infighting, are actually just consequences of this economic incentive in the war that are being designed to get people distracted and fighting together.
So that's
it's the illusion that you're losing your freedoms when people around the world actually have no freedoms, and they are willing to put their life on the lines to get those freedoms.
Yeah.
It is not an illusion that you're losing your freedoms. Those freedoms. So if we vote for an economic system, and most of that economic system is hidden from us through inflation, and we have no vote in that, then can we say we live in a democracy where our vote counts? And it is, and here, because if governments structurally have to inflate, or the whole thing collapses, and that inflation steals our time, it's a theft, and it steals our time, and that must get bigger and bigger and bigger as we vote for people who have to lie to us more. And once we see under the curtain of that lie, that they have to be able to in Canada right now, they're deciding what is good content on the internet. That comes away, that takes my right to choose away, and it puts in the government control, so they can keep up an illusion of this, of the Wizard of Oz behind the glass, behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So I do. If I looked back 20 years, 30 years, it might have been there all the time, but the rate of that kind of my freedoms going away didn't look like, I didn't grow up in that society. And I'm measuring, and a lot of people are measuring what you might be, what you grew up with, and thinking that that's going to be here in 20 years.
Yeah.
And if you just play these out without Bitcoin, that will not be here in 20 years.
Look, I'm with you. I agree. There is a decline in freedoms at the moment. If freedom is a spectrum, we're on a decline at the moment. In whether it's the US, whether it's Canada, whether it's the UK, there is a decline. And I like the idea of defending our freedoms and defending democracy. And I think we understand the issues with the current monetary system, the monetary misinformation that we talked about in our last interview. I think we're in a very small minority that understand that. So when people are voting, I don't think they realize they're voting in a system that is designed to break them.
So carry that forward. So, and that's actually where I'm sympathetic to a bunch of the Bitcoiners that are hardliners here, even though I don't agree with the Citadels as an answer, but I'm totally sympathetic to where they're going, and because they see where this takes us, and it does take us there. And then they see, okay, wait, those people don't understand what we're talking about. And then this podcast that touches those people and makes it important gets banned by YouTube. And if government can tell us what is right and what is wrong, then our freedoms are completely gone. and it has to happen. Not it might happen.
Mm.
Out of the existing system, it's a structural system that has to get worse. And the only way that structural system saves itself is by taking away the individual rights and freedoms.
But we do have an opportunity to fight against this here. It's like if we're in China
Well-
and the CBDC is being implemented, nobody can do anything about it. It
Forever.
happens. Forever. But here, sorry, just to finish, whereas CBDC, it was announced in the UK, they wanted to call it Bitcoin. There are people publicly talking against it. And yes, it could be banned as speech, but it isn't. And right now, people are trying to talk against it. And we will get to vote in a democracy, which is based on a government that could implement that system. So what I'm saying is, like, I think we have a decline in freedoms, but we have the opportunity to fight, defend them.
But this is a really great debate talking point.
Yeah,
and I understand all sides. I understand all the sides of it. But now you just said 99% of the people don't know what we're talking about.
Whatever that number is. Yeah.
Huge amount of population is completely wool pulled over their eyes that have no idea. And now let's say you have the inflation rate and the government says, we're going to print more money so we can give you more money. But it has to be done through CBDC. And nobody knows what we're talking about. What do you think happens?
Oh, look, I know people will take the money,
They take the money on a CBDC
because they're desperate
all day long.
Yeah.
Because the desperation came from the government policies in the first place that created the desperation. And then they're going to use the same desperation to drive a CBDC. So that's why this fight or this, and I know Bitcoin's an idea. I try not to attack the system because it's not a people. It's just a system that's going to keep doing this. But that's why this idea is so important. And that's why if you're in Bitcoin, you almost can't stop talking about it. You want to spend more time in it because it's that important.
Well, and this is something I agree with Jeff said, and I maybe to clarify, I also have a lot of sympathy. I mean, I've seen firsthand what some of the early developers, early people in Bitcoin have had to deal with shitcoiners, with lies, with FUD, with constantly being misaligned, with people who came in and originally were very supportive of Bitcoin and then flipped and became altcoiners or, shitcoiners and scammers. So you develop this almost immune response system that almost like a reaction to, COVID, it protects you. Your immune system response protects you, but it's a cytokine or a cytokine storm can be created where the immune system response actually goes into overdrive and starts to become the actual enemy of the good. And so to a certain degree, these reactions, the meme culture, the calling out shitcoins, the attacking anyone who attacks Bitcoin, being very, very skeptical of like mainstream media, environmentalism and climate issues being used to attack Bitcoin and all the FUD that goes with that. And you can totally understand why people are up in arms and just saying, I'm sorry, these are lies perpetuated to keep people in economic slavery and be really, really upset by that. I just think, part of maturing and a part of, I think, where Bitcoin needs to go, it served us incredibly well as a community. We're now reaching out to people that are on farther and farther on the edges, who are more programmed by that stuff. And how you reach a lot of these people is you need to figure out a way to communicate with them where they're at, not where you're at.
I completely agree. I mean, this is something we discuss continually here. The podcast reviews, we get reviews on Apple, and I get an email every week from Chartable telling me them. I've had 2 people recently say, I'm done with the podcast. It's too many right-leaning libertarians. And we laugh because we think we're probably the most broad Bitcoin show there is. We've had people like Ben Ark and Margot Paez who are lefties who want to talk about Bitcoin. And we're trying to bring that broad spectrum in now. Like, all the libertarians have heard of Bitcoin. They all know about it now. We're going to the masses and we're trying to say, how do we open up this dialogue? How do we make people not scared of Bitcoin? It doesn't matter whether you're on the left, the right, the center, the libertarian. How do we make it for everyone?
And it's funny you just said the libertarians. When I spoke at the Austrian conference, the central bank, there were a bunch of libertarians in the room. Many of them didn't own Bitcoin.
I know. It always fascinates me.
And I'm like, really? like, but again, Bitcoin is apolitical. If you're on the left and you truly want to lift people out of poverty, I actually cannot believe that they're not all over Bitcoin.
I know.
Well, I've seen it in Canada. So I've sat down with central bankers, people on the left, on the right in Canada, especially when I was like living in Canada and trying, through my work with Blockstream and being involved in Bitcoin, we were trying to educate everyone, and really as a bipartisan issue, just all Canadians. And we did this in other countries as well. And so I was very, very comfortable sitting down with conservatives who, hated government spending and were very up in arms about rising government spending, who wanted to, drill more pipelines, use more fossil fuels, use the oil sands, and be able to talk to them about Bitcoin as a tool for economic sovereignty, economic liberty, and for uplifting everyone's ability to pull themselves up the economic ladder. And we went from everything to First Nations, like reserves, to crippling socialized healthcare system. How does Bitcoin end up benefiting to things like UBI, which they were adamantly against because they view it as just, worse than the existing social programs that exist.
Yep.
But when you start to say, what is the goal of UBI? If you go back to first principles, UBI is an assumed answer to a very real problem. If people have no social safety net and jobs don't exist, and this ability to pull yourself up an economic ladder is totally, outside of the reach of everyone, people eventually fall into hopelessness, crime, despair. That is just a natural state of someone without opportunity. And as we see computers, technology, AI, as we see the shift of jobs happen so quicker, such that, you were trained as a truck driver and now you have to go train as an empathy nurse to replace a robot who has no empathy. It's like, that is literally one of the jobs that's been identified as
really?
One of the fastest growing jobs in the next 10 years will be what's called an empathy nurse. And it's someone who actually works with the dying, the elderly, and just is there to listen to them as a human empathy node.
And then that'll be taken by AI.
And eventually that's going to be taken by a robot and an AI too.
Yeah.
Is there anything that the robots can't take?
No.
Over time, no.
No. Over time, no. That's the kind of the most and there's a whole bunch of
Sex
people,
workers, all these things will be replaced. I mean, already there's experiments on all of the, like, you just name any function that can be automated will be automated over a course of a period of time. And so what do humans end up being good at?
How close are we to having a robot that can replace a podcast producer?
Not you, Peter. Never.
Never you.
It can't replace my assistant Emma ever. Yeah, I mean, look, it's.
But again,
Yeah.
but just come back to that, because all of the other nonsense we talk about is that thing happening at a structural level that it will not stop.
Yeah.
It's going to keep on going. It's going to move at an incredible pace. And every politician there will tell you, we're going to create more jobs. We're going to create more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. We're going to drive more growth. And what they're really saying is we're going to decrease your real wages through inflation to pay you less to be able to be on a mouse wheel forever. That's what they're really saying, because that's what the more jobs are doing. Well, AI is going to take. Well, technology is going to take them anyways. And that's why. So even Andrew Yang, he came out with the same thing I came out with. I think World Economic Forum understands the same thing I came out with. But the free market of ideas, I just had a different solution. And my solution was radical. That why wouldn't we let prices fall as that happened and save our time? And it sounds really radical, but it's not radical at all. It's
more important, by creating a culture with the right incentives, where you create a culture of ownership that recognizes the time preference of actual sound money.
Mm-hmm.
You can totally change a lot of these social engineering or societal issues that you want to deal with. Start to actually take on new meaning.
They fall away.
But things that seemed impossible before, actually, you can start to reapproach them and say, what if? I'm not saying we have all the answers, right? I am not one of these people who thinks every single solution gets solved with Bitcoin. But I think a lot of things that didn't work in the past, because they were all based off perpetuating a lie around bad incentive design, bad economics, and keeping this image that somehow the government's going to pick winners and losers. And if you just work hard enough, and if you just are honest, you can make it too.
Jeff, look, can I just ask you a question? Because you mentioned talking about the system is designed in a way to keep us almost reliant upon the government and desperate, and it's a perpetual problem that gets increasingly worse for us. Is your belief that, like, when you say it's there by design, there are people who actually want this to be, or is this just like a natural outcome from the incentives of the system?
And we're trying to take it out of our own, to remove our own bias, and just imagine another planet.
Yeah.
Right? Another planet trying to move to a multi-planetary species.
Okay.
You would assume that planet would first, creatures living on that planet would have to assume kind of tribes or groups to be able to protect themselves, develop villages. Dunbar's number here, but then they would expand, and to trade between other groups, they'd have to agree on something as a currency. In that currency, it would probably be the hardest material. It might start at seashells or whatever in another planet, but then it would over time form the hardest currency. That currency couldn't be moved around at the velocity. That currency couldn't be moved around at the velocity of the population growing and expanding global trade on that planet. So you would build on top of it. You'd build a credit-based system. So now you could get velocity in your money, so you could move faster. But the credit-based system on top of that hard money would be always subject to human nature, boom bust cycles. And as it got too big, the boom cycle got too big, and the incentives to remove the hard money from it would just naturally and then that society would go to war to be able to decide the winner of the war and come back to hard money.
There are sci-fi books that talk about this on, like, Mars, and the hardest asset they use is actually oxygen.
So no matter where you are on a planet, if you had to get off to a multiplanetary species, the only way to get to a multiplanetary species, because our human bodies can't stand the time to get to other planets, so would have to be our consciousness would move into robots. We would be merging with machines and such. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's coming. And the transition step from the time as that society built the technology to be able to do 3D printing of asteroids and materials and form factor and all this technology to be a multiplanetary species would be the exact same time that if they didn't move to a currency that allowed that technology to enable them to do that, they would blow up their planet. And through that kind of thought experiment, because that technology to be able to do that allows us we don't need human labor. But the entire construct of the free market was around the division of labor. And the division of labor, how much our wages are all over the world, was a huge part of getting there. Same thing would happen on any other planet. So the same thing, that technology component to be a multiplanetary species, if that society couldn't transition into something away from that hard material, that the network itself could provide the velocity, because that's what Bitcoin does. Right? The network, you can have unlimited velocity and money from the network, traded all peer-to-peer all around the world. Unless you could do that, you probably what that means is the great filter is in front of us. And what you're seeing playing out in the world right now, and the risk of real war all over the world, is actually what I think is happening, and it's caused by that exact same thing. It's caused by technology advancing at a pace that requires a different system.
And so this same technology curve, this same shift that's happening, the trends that Jeff talks about, they certainly give rise to this idea that, digital scarcity ends up having to be a precursor to actually building the idea exchange, the highly functioning society that allows at scale us to manage the transition into the future. Without it, there is inevitably a move towards perpetuating the lie, continuing the lie. And at one point, the technologies of asymmetric warfare and mass destruction get big enough, far enough, that if you have not caught up in moving away from the lie and actually moving everyone up the economic ladder so that there is some sort of sense of shared consciousness, shared responsibility, shared hope, that is predominant. It doesn't have to be everywhere because, you have to be a realist, but it has to be more the default than the rarity. Because if it is the default behavior and there is an overall sense of hope and optimism, and it is being seen as more equal opportunity with lots of those economic ladders to climb up of, then people are going to spend their time just trying to land on the square with the economic ladder. They're not going to spend all their time looking over their shoulders to see, did I land on a snake? And who do I need to take down with me if I'm going to be going down the snake?
But if this does help everyone climb the economic ladder, the incentive therefore is for politicians who want to be successful and maintain a successful career in politics and have a legacy, that Bitcoin adoption is a logical solution.
That's what's happening, but it's happening at a rate. The rate that happens is exactly what Austin's talking about. The rate that happens, and it'll happen through incentives, same incentives, because it gives a politician that couldn't get elected under the other system power to tell the truth and expose a lie and get elected from this. And as more and more of us choose that, it happens. And then the incentives are aligned where instead of citadels, every different country choosing Bitcoin, or a very different nation or network of people choosing Bitcoin, is going to design the system that they want with representation. And one politician might say, we need 20% flat tax on everything we do to be able to provide all of these services. And we will vote with our feet and our businesses to move there if we like that. And another politician might say, no, we can do it for 5%. And you're just going to scorecard your opportunities, and you're going to say, this is the domain I want to move to.
So there's a famous quote. I can't remember who wrote it, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it says something to the degree of, the greatest liar you ever meet is the one you meet every morning in the mirror. And it is based off this idea that the human brain and its ability to lie to itself is a necessary part of human evolution, right? We need to create this sense of hope. We need to be able to look at risks and lie to ourselves about how serious these risks are, just to get over fear, just to be able to take on some sense of risk taking, to normalize what is at times very reactive. So, in many respects, the ability to lie to ourselves about our past, about pain we suffered, so that it actually can reside into the past. So it's not, ever present. Have memories that fade. These are all necessary parts of how the human brain, and part of that is the ability to lie to yourself. But that ability to lie to ourselves makes us so susceptible to wanting to believe other people's lies. And it opens us up to, because we want to believe the lie, because the lie feels so good. And so it takes someone who's actually gone through some heartache, gone through some suffering, has kind of looked at themselves in the mirror, I think more times than not, to say, you know what? My life is actually happier when I don't lie to myself. And that sense of maturity, that oftentimes privilege, is something people can't do that often when they're running for their lives and trying to avoid getting shot every morning. You don't spend a lot of time looking in the mirror. You spend all your time looking for, where do I get my next meal?
But even go take that same thing and move up the ladder to people that you think are super successful, or in politicians that you think. Let's use Elizabeth Warren as an example. And I know what people think, but what do you think her base tells her?
Well, with regards to what?
Would her base throw flowers, parties, parades as she's going after the rich people?
Possibly. Depends.
She's getting emails all the time. Thank you. And she feels like, wow, I'm saving all of these people.
Yeah.
When in fact, her policies are actually destroying them.
Yeah.
But they believe that it's saving them. And she's caught in that lie and can see no way out of it, because actually calling that, telling that I was wrong destroys her entire power base of everything else. So
Well,
she's
and her self-narrative.
and her self narrative.
Her self-narrative is, I am fighting for the people, the same way I did when I instituted the financial oversight board following the 2008 collapse, and she actually did do
She did a great job.
great job.
Yeah.
And so for her, this is a continuation of the same mission to say, look at these billionaires who stole all this wealth during the pandemic at the expense of the little guy,
And she
totally ignoring the fact that the billionaires didn't do it. The government did it with money printing.
It's a system.
And the system created, you could have sat on your ass and been a horrible businessman and see your wealth increase incredibly high. So it wasn't some mad genius, only these rich tech executives who are so smart to run the world and are like, the evil Illuminati of the world, how somehow stole this money from. No,
It was a system.
it was the system.
But her entire her whole persona is inside that, and she believes it.
I'm not sure she can believe some of the things she said recently, which is just such obvious lies, like blaming or accusing companies of profiteering when it's clearly inflation. Like I don't believe she doesn't realize she's lying.
And maybe, but do you know anybody else, maybe a friend, who got so over their skis on their belief system that was clearly wrong?
No,
they protected it at all costs.
I believe the system is for her to lie. But this takes me to the point, Jeff, that I really like in this, in that a lot of the conversations I like the new externalities that come from Bitcoin. So we've talked a lot previously about how Bitcoin mining is changing the energy system.
Yeah.
And that is an amazing thing, which I doubt Satoshi thought of. But saying that, Hal Finney himself, somebody dug out an old tweet of his talking
totally.
about the energy sector. But maybe he did, but I doubt he did. I like this idea. We talked about, again, I repeat in our last interview, but talked about misinformation and money. And the misinformation and money incentivize people to lie. When there's no misinformation and money, where there is only truth, it incentivizes the politicians to tell the truth.
They have to.
They have to tell the truth. So this idea, like going back to what I said earlier, I'm not a burn the system down guy. I want to strengthen democracy. So if truth around money in Bitcoin forces politicians to tell the truth, then what we do is we strengthen democracy.
Yes.
So one of the things we talked earlier, I mentioned kind of this idea of some of what's happening in truth machine development, right?
Yeah.
There's these 4D functional MRIs that are now able to go into your thoughts. They're able to read images. And we are getting very close to the idea of a totally 100% accurate truth machine that will remove essentially anyone's ability to lie. It will do a series of biofeedback, micro expressions, brain imaging, such that people will not be able to lie. And those technologies will be mass consumerized so that you'll have something on your watch that will essentially tell you this person's a liar or not every time they open their mouth.
Sounds very Black Mirror.
Very Black Mirror, very scary.
Yeah.
And society is not ready for that.
No.
But you start saying, okay, if Bitcoin moves people towards more honesty, more self-awareness, a time preference, and moves people to actually disabandon the lie and embrace the truth, it actually acts the way it should, which is a truth sayer, driving more people towards the truth and moving society to a framework where we actually have objective truth and we can depend on it, because that is the purpose of the blockchain, is objective truth that we can rely on. Now, so much of what we deal with in society is subjective.
Uh-huh.
And it's not well suited to AI and blockchains. And we like to say Bitcoin fixes this, when in fact there's a lot of human messiness. But the underlying systems and the base technology should move society and humanity towards that objective truth much faster for those who embrace it. And I think part of our job is to help more people understand it and embrace it earlier, in preparation for the time when it will be forced on them. Because any technology or any social change that is forced on people inevitably leads to a very violent reaction.
Of course.
Because what he just said, and adding on to say that truth machine, the real risk is if that becomes in a central bank digital currency where that's used as a control function for everybody else.
Yeah.
that becomes a real risk.
Please answer the truth machine before you authorize this transaction. Did you use this money to spread lies about our leaders? Did you use this money to disagree with the current narrative? I'm sorry, your transaction is not approved.
I know, which sounds it sounds very 1984. And 5-6 years ago, I said, "Well, this
just happened last month in Canada."
Well, that's what I was going to say. Well, not in my country. It literally has just happened in Canada.
Yeah,
and it's shocking.
Did you see the recent Alex Gladstein just put this up? But in China, this people singing from lockdown from their high rises.
Yeah.
Did you see this?
Yeah, I've seen them.
And the drone coming by to say, "Go inside. You're no singing here. Curb your ability to." And you want a dystopian future, and where you actually have to. You can't get out. There's and technology will take, if you concentrate wealth, that much power through technology into a couple of people's hands or a nation's hands, that's what will happen. And if it's not that leader, if that benevolent leader that you love, it won't do it, then their son will. It locks humanity in forever into a system that people don't rise up. The vast majority of people are the silent majority that don't stand up against the worst crimes around. And why in a society, in a totalitarian society, don't they? Because the people that do stand up go get shot.
Yeah.
Right. And so if most people won't stand up today, what do you think will happen with tools of control that completely change the ability for the controller to do that at scale?
Well, this is why I think it's so important to get the communications with this into politics in the right way, because a US government that fears China, who is considering a CBDC and the similar controls that China has, you have to do a better job of control than China, and you can't.
You can't.
You cannot beat China at the control game. So beat them at the freedom game. Beat them at the truth machine. Beat them at the,
Well, so Jeff and I did an interesting thought experiment. So we were playing out the ideas. So one of the arguments against Bitcoin that often gets repeated, especially by gold bugs, is the idea that because they agree with Bitcoiners on almost all things, right? In terms of the root cause of the problem, government spending, inflation, they just believe that gold is real, Bitcoin not real. And obviously a lot of gold bugs have evolved from that, those who actually study it and look at it see that it is a better form.
Larry Leopold.
Yeah, Larry's incredible on that. Yeah. Many of them are very informed and have actually looked at it with the same honest analysis that they led to conclusions about gold. But one criticism I've heard leveled on this is when the inevitable reset happens, why would the government ever choose Bitcoin? Because if they're late to the party, one of the last currencies standing, why wouldn't they just go back to the gold standard? Because they hold all the gold. And Jeff had this, we were going back and forth, and Jeff said, for all the countries that got pushed off the gold standard, who have no gold anymore, why would they ever go back to that system and trust the US and trust, China or trust Russia or trust the few countries who actually have gold? Like, they have no incentive to agree to the system. So the currency wars continue. There is no international reserve currency. And so it is literally impossible to go back to the past and adopt that system.
Yeah.
China, Russia, and US would have to get together and agree and then count each other's reserves, which who knows who has, and trust each other at the expense of every other nation to be able to go back to that. It's nonsense.
But when you see these systems and these kind of end games and you do this kind of war game scenario, you realize, to your point, the opportunity to actually change people's perception of their freedoms, of their everyday happiness, and have that associated with pro-privacy, pro-freedom technologies like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not the only one. It's just the best one and the only one in the monetary sense that has ever come along. But there are other technologies. When people no longer live in fear and actually feel like, okay, I can control my data. They don't live in fear of surveillance. So, some other cypherpunk technologies that allow people to feel like, you know what? I'm not living in fear of being tracked every day. I can actually go about my life. I can talk to my neighbor. I can speak freely about my disagreements with the government without fear that if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to be thrown in jail. And so by embedding these kind of pro-privacy, pro-individual, self-sovereign technologies, and I'm a big fan recently of expanding those beyond just monetary, because I think money is at the base of it, but money in and of itself, as we're seeing, isn't enough. People were using Bitcoin in Canada, and they were targeted by chain analysis. They were targeted by who they were. They were targeted based off donating to something that was completely legal at the time, that the government retroactively said, we don't think is any legal anymore. So we want to create an environment where people don't feel like the single misstep or the single wrong word or speaking out for something you love will somehow come back on you. Because what eventually ends up happening is you get this kind of silent self-censorship, this kind of natural inclination to, I'm never going to take any risk. I'm not going to talk. And our society depends, the future of our existence as humans depends on our ability to stand up on the shoulders of people before us and say, I'm willing to take it one step further and take some risk. And if the Chinese model, if these totalitarian models that have everyone living in fear become the dominant, and CBCs are part of that, totalitarian controls, oligopolies, like you said, democracy is incredibly horrible, but it's the best system of a bunch of horrible systems. But if people don't have that freedom to say, I am willing to go take a risk, and I can do it for economic improvement, I can do it for happiness improvement, I can do it just to get out there and try my hand as a stand-up comedian and say, fuck you to power, because I think I might be funny, even though I get laughed off stage. But do that in an environment without fear. If we rob them of that, we build a couple more generations that grow up in this environment of fear, I really am afraid for our ability for humanity. But I want to remind people, I'm the most hopeful technologist and optimist you'll ever see. A friend of mine recently said, Austin, he goes, I loved your podcast, but why does every Bitcoin podcast end with the world is falling down and the system has to die and everyone's going to end up, the end of the world is coming? And I'm like, you're missing the part of the message. Like, Bitcoin is that life raft.
Yeah.
Like, the reason we do what we do is because we believe that this can be averted or at least softened. Some things are inevitable.
Yep.
The change is coming, but it doesn't have to come with the violence and the human suffering that would happen without Bitcoin.
A peaceful revolution.
And just building on that, I'm starting a Bitcoin-only ecosystem fund.
Okay.
Between 30 and 50 million starting. And then there's a bunch of others that are starting. And why are they starting? And why am I doing this? Because what I realized is, yes, I have a whole bunch of other investments and I still spend a lot of time kind of educating Bitcoin or doing this. But then I go back to my work and the other work. And as I understand what Bitcoin can become, not just the network and what happens and all the entrepreneurs on top of it that are building the next wave of innovation, you look at that and you go, wait, I love this industry. I love the people that are doing this. And I'm going to spend more time here advancing the industry that's going to make this happen. And it won't be just me. Why? Because there's such an asymmetric bet for all of the new technology stack that's coming out on top of this protocol. And I don't think that's well understood by most people today, because they're building on altcoins and stuff that are unstable foundations. That it's not the entrepreneurs building on top of them. Those entrepreneurs are just trying to develop something that matters. But when they understand that, wait, I can build it onto a protocol that is stable, and they couldn't a long time ago. They couldn't last year, but now they can. And all of this technology is now opening up to where there's just going to be this wild growth curve in what's to come. And I think, why wouldn't I invest my time there? Because it's fun, asymmetric bet. And so I can spend more time, and you can see all of the people around this space diving in and wanting to spend more time. That tells you something.
Yeah.
It tells you something where the world's going, and that world is really hopeful.
Austin, just circling back to what you mentioned previously about the importance of free speech with all of this. What do you make of Elon Musk's Twitter move? I think it's super interesting. He's clearly somebody who I do believe is uh, a supporter of free speech. He understands the importance of free speech. Yeah, let's give a pass to his Chinese factories at the moment because he has business decisions to make. But do you believe that this is something he recognizes? He recognizes the threat to the US, to humanity, that speech has been shut down, and that Twitter is a real focal point for this. Like, how important is this? Because I part of me has like been pinning my hopes to his recent move that this is going to swing the pendulum back to more freer speech. But I don't want to put too much hopes on one individual.
I think that's an important comment, and I think your last statement is one of the most important. We often compare Bitcoin to TCP/IP.
Uh-huh.
On our last conversation, I know, I don't. At one point, I know it's probably coming. We talked about the evolution of TCP/IP actually didn't depend on any one person, but it did at various points depend on principled people fighting for certain rights. I gave the example of John Postel and the domain name system that could have been taken back and controlled by the United States. Elon, and I want to be careful here because Elon gets an outsized amount of attention because he is a change maker. He is the world's richest person. He has disrupted and changed so many industries. And when he came into Bitcoin, everyone ran off and were like, he's our savior. And then you see people walking around with fuck Elon t-shirts because he somehow betrayed us. I knew Elon when he was at PayPal. I've interacted with him at various times. He has an incredible sense of humor. He is an incredible engineer. He has an incredible sense of irony. And in fact, a big part of his life is based off, all things being equal, the most ironic situation is the most likely. I think part of this is a genuine reflection that he loves how Twitter gives him a sense of freedom and to bypass the short sellers, bypass the media, talk directly to a fan base. And I think he treasures that and believes that it's a goodness in society. But I'm making assumptions there. I know a lot of people who came to me and were like, Austin, you got to talk to Elon about his support of Dogecoin. And somehow like it was my responsibility to save the world from, investing in Dogecoin, right?
Well, at times it does rely on individuals.
My personal opinion, I think Elon is very aware of what he's doing with Dogecoin. I think he appreciates it for the joke it is. And the SEC sued him. This is just a personal opinion.
Yeah.
The SEC sued him for promoting Bitcoin. He is absolutely restricted from talking about his real opinions on Bitcoin, but he can make jokes about Dogecoin all he wants because the company holds none. And if people are dumb enough to believe in the most inflation turned up inflationary coin in the world, he views it as a lesson in radical self-awareness and radical self-sufficiency. He is a Burning Man burner at heart. And so he's like, if you don't do your research and you want to believe all this Dogecoin stuff, and he loves memes. So, you can look at his love of Twitter for all the same reasons. And when you love something and you have those types of resources, you want to protect it. You want to leave your mark on it. And I'm hopeful that he can help the health of Twitter. But I also have a tons of appreciation for what Jack has done and the thoughtfulness and the pressure that Jack has been under. And everyone likes to look for easy solutions, right? So when I built one of my startups, we were looking at, there was this game called Post Secret, if you're familiar. It was a real world game where someone started leaving postcards around the world and said, you can mail me your secret on a postcard. And it took off. And if you ever go into a library, look at Post Secret. You can find it on the web. The most heart-wrenching but beautiful pieces of art. People who constructed these, sometimes at the end of my bottle of medicine, I wish it would never end because I'm more empty inside than this bottle of medicine. Like heartbreaking but like people revealing their souls. And so when Frank Warren, who created Post Secret, he started collecting these, putting them in a book. He sold the books to support national suicide lines. He went and put it online. And the worst parts, what was a beautiful project, the worst parts of human behavior started coming out, and he took it offline. People would be sending in online versions of, I left her body at these GPS coordinates.
Oh,
And he just said, you know what? There's something authentic and beautiful about this. I'm taking it offline. I'm going to keep it on postcards because the worst parts of anonymity and pseudonymity and people trying to troll me come out online, and I just don't want it. So as technologists, we're like, put everything online. It can solve everything.
yeah.
But this was like a great example of something that was actually ruined by the ephemerality, by the anonymity, by the pseudonymity. And so by the same degree, we all love Twitter. Twitter has changed the public concept of a public square. But it also has come with a lot of downsides.
Peter doesn't love Twitter.
It has come with downsides.
It does.
Which we both suffered from. It affected my health when I was running Blockstream. I started feeling like an attack on Blockstream. I had a real hard time distancing the attacks on the company from attacks on me and it started to affect my happiness and health.
Done it to me. People won't know, but Jeff's my secret Twitter mentor. He gives me advice, and then, like a disappointed parent, a few days later, I ignore his advice and do something stupid. But
the same thing people do on Bitcoin too, because the idea becomes you, and then you defend your own yourself, your ego, when somebody attacks the idea, and that's pretty normal. So what the thing we say. No one can hurt your feelings without your ability to say, nobody can say anything to you that matters. Like, why do you let it matter? From some unknown source, like, how could, I just kind of go, how could that hurt?
I think what it is it can come down to volume. Like the occasional thing is fine, but when you can hear the same thing over and over again, it's like, okay, have they got a point? Am I a dumbass? Well, actually, I've accepted that one. But
so it's just so you know, a bunch of people that love you because of the way you do that. You're no dumbass, but the way that you open up that conversation, you'll call yourself it's a huge reason for your following. So yeah, people say that to you.
It's also useful sometimes. It's also useful because it's a mirror to question yourself, and I'm okay with it. Actually, in the end, it comes down to productivity. Michael Saylor said he said a brilliant thing to me last time I spoke to him. It's all about focus. Where are you focused? Where's your energy? Where are you productive? And actually, this is the most productive thing I can do. I don't think I'm the best interviewer. I think I have some good questions, but I somehow have ability to get good people together like you two to have this conversation that can go out to thousands, tens of thousands of people, and that's a productive use of time.
So when I coach startups, we talked about this as the density of intensity.
Okay.
And I said the scarcest resource you have as a startup is focus. And if you think about your job as directed energy, you have to choose. Do you want to be a flashlight or a laser beam? Right? Because your job is to break through some barrier. Some barrier of market acceptance, some barrier of technology, some technical barrier you need to break through. And do you want to be doing it with a flashlight, pointing a flashlight at a steel thing? Or do you want to be the laser that actually has a chance to punch through?
Yeah.
And it's only once you actually punch through and you're able to increase the size or the scope, the diameter of your laser, do you actually build a bigger hole and you have the energy to actually take on bigger battles. But initially, if you're trying to do that with a flashlight, it's never going to work.
Yeah. Also, the whole old cliche of the man on his deathbed. What do you wish? I wish I'd work less. I think we can add into that now. I wish I'd been on Twitter less. It's fascinating because I've lost time to family. My daughter, she's like, what are you doing on Twitter? Now I've told her I'm off Twitter. She's like, is it still on your phone? Like, she recognizes the impact. So productivity, use of time, like time and Bitcoin are both scarce resources. How do you best use them? Bitcoin, I'm okay with that. I've managed that. Now, how best use the time we have? And we all have a diminishing amount. It's a scarce resource. Yeah. And do I want to do productive things? Do I want to do things that makes me happy? Do I want to do things that make my family happy? So a lot of it's down to productivity. Actually, also, personal growth. I actually find Twitter has a negative impact on personal growth. I think it can turn people into absolute pricks.
When I changed my opinion about Twitter and I changed my own habits around it, I was able to find incredible resources where I'm able to tap into Twitter to network with subject matter experts, to tap into a global, kind of consciousness or global expertise on certain topics that I would never be able to have access to before. But I have totally anonymous Twitter accounts that I use for that.
Huh.
And I have multiple devices, and some of my devices don't have any of my accounts.
Interesting.
And so for me, I've found quite the opposite. I've met so many incredible people on that platform. Now met them personally, but connected on that platform. But I might only go on once a day.
Yeah.
I might, and I can't get through all of this stuff, but I try to, and why? Because I need to focus my time on more important things. So it doesn't drive me. It doesn't fulfill me to say, okay, I have to do this, have to do this on this. I use it, but as a tool to meet people all over the world and some incredible and learn things too.
Well, you and I met through Twitter.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
I can't remember, you reached out to me.
Yeah. We met through Twitter.
So yeah, I mean,
yeah. Look, how do you value that?
Oh no, I will be back on it in a different way, but you have to have that moment to escape, consider it, personal growth, reflect, and go back. But circling back, as we all recognize, it is an important tool. So it's important that it defends free speech.
So can I jump into the Elon conversation and from a
What's your perspective?
So nobody knows why he's doing it, but I do believe he believes in free speech.
Yeah.
I do believe he understands the problem at the monetary level, at the policy level. But a lot of his businesses rely on the monetary level like it is. And that creates the wealthiest person on the planet and the most powerful person and the most interact. And now you think about the wealthiest person on the planet owns a satellite network that will be a communication, that owns an energy network and automotive, and moving into a robotic network that knows all the same things that I know about where technology is going. In fact, he builds his business by projecting what he can deliver you 2 or 3 years and selling you this vision and then charging you today for it. That's how he builds all his businesses. And all of these businesses is now in communication channels. What do you think that could look like, the risk to one man holding that much control over all of these things and influence over us that turns, and that's the thing.
He could be the dark overlord.
He could be fantastic, but trusting a system on one man's opinion who could change their mind is a really bad system. And so in that piece, I know he's a bit older and he hasn't sold, but if he understands all of this same thing the way that we do, then I find it disingenuous to talk about Dogecoin because we won't be a multiplanetary species if we have Dogecoin. we will blow ourselves up. Well, so I find it's completely disingenuous just to say we have to be a multiplanetary species, but I'm benefiting from a system, and all of the West wealth and power is benefiting from a system that is not a free market system, that has negative externalities to everybody else, and I'm not going to advocate for the right system. And so that is my thing specifically with Elon, and it just kind of reinforces the whole thing. Don't meet your heroes. Don't idolize people. Because Bitcoin doesn't care. It doesn't care about me. Doesn't care about you. It just keeps on doing the job, and it doesn't allow any single person to have that much control.
Well, that was one of the great observations during the week, was that he buys $3 billion in stock, in Twitter stock, and ends up with a board seat to exert his influence over it. Michael Saylor's bought $3 billion in Bitcoin. He can't exert his control over consensus rules.
And Michael Saylor's influence grows based off his advocacy, grows based off the reputation. I think could continue to grow based off potentially products that MicroStrategy delivers, or investments they make in the open source community, or expansions they make into Bitcoin's functionality beyond just being owners and hodlers. Um, and I think those are well deserved, kind of meritocracy based investments. And I would not put it past Elon to have very similar ambitions for Bitcoin as well. If you start thinking about, Bitcoin in a grid, Bitcoin in robotics, Bitcoin in power, compensation, or Bitcoin in abundant power systems, in dealing with some of the inequities in grid payments and distribution and storage of energy, when you start to have abundant solar and issues around transfer or recharge. So there are so many potentials for Bitcoin to solve some of the very real issues that align with some of his goals of helping slow down the destruction of this planet, in his view, and many people, based off climate, helping extend the window that we have to get to another planet. There's so many things that Bitcoin actually aligned and support that mission. But to Jeff's point, if they depend on one person controlling the entire system, and it depends on perpetuating a lie, we just have to assume that externalities and other incentives put any reliance on one person at too important of a role, and Bitcoin should be fighting against that. He's never made any secret. He come out very publicly and said, I was late to the Bitcoin game, right? Like, we knew a lot of the PayPal investors. I raised some money from some of the PayPal investors. I knew them back in their day when they were working on PayPal. We were working on eCash at zero knowledge, so we spent a lot of time with other people working on payment systems like PayPal. And these people weren't dumb, weren't ignorant to Bitcoin. But Elon has said he ignored it for so many years because his main priority was Tesla and SpaceX.
Do you think, because obviously he's fully aware of Bitcoin now. They bought 1.5 billion in Bitcoin for Tesla. He's talked about, but he's obviously done some research. Do you think hyper Bitcoinization is a risk to his businesses and the dominance his businesses have, and the potential rate of innovation? So what I would put there is, a lot of people criticize MMT and incentive structures, but also I think you have to accept sometimes with things like MMT, there is a ability for money to be directed towards certain projects that drive innovation. Like Tesla wouldn't exist as it is today without this government subsidies.
Yeah, but that's a double-sided, as we've seen.
No, I know.
One administration props him up, the other one excludes him.
I'm not justifying it. What I'm saying is that's an outcome from it. Is hyper Bitcoinization a risk to his?
So he's a great enough entrepreneur with enough different businesses that the answer is no. That he's already crossed the Rubicon on some of these businesses. I don't know if you know this, but in 1980, it cost $25,000 per kilogram to get something into space. His new rocket coming out next year, the year after, will launch for about $200 per kilogram.
Wow.
It's the market. It's the market force of that reduction in price that opens up a new frontier, satellites frontier, and it opens up so many other frontiers that we don't see until that opens up. So he's already the leader in a whole bunch of these industries, and arguably one of the leaders in artificial intelligence, because of what the cars are mapping, and that turning into robotics. So where that's coming. So he has already crossed that Rubicon, and so would it slow down some of his businesses, or would it slow down all the businesses as everything is repriced into this new event? Yeah, but he could also play on that side of it.
Well, and so famously, there's been criticism of Elon, and I'm not on the ground. I'm not aware of the facts, but obviously there's been a lot of attacks on how he treats workers, how he treats, there's some lawsuits about, kind of racial issues in his factories. There was a lot of criticism about his lack of support of unions. And in fact, many people point out that this administration has actually, gone out of its way to not recognize or acknowledge or give any funding to Tesla because it's not a union shop. And Elon has talked about this. He believes in treating his employees better than any union would. His frustration with unions is that they just don't allow him to improve or iterate fast enough for the future that he's building. He just says, I need to make mistakes and I need to learn from them. And I need to do that faster than any union will let me, because a union purposely gets in there and negotiates and won't even let you see the result of your mistake. And he goes, I can't build the future our society needs fast enough. He's got that incredible time pressure.
And that's a fair argument.
And that's a very fair argument. And he says, so when I oppose a union, it's not because I don't believe my employees deserve the best. He goes, I actually believe it's killing the very thing that we're all here to prevent, which is, not evolving technology fast enough to save us from a future we don't want and provide the future we do. And so you can look at that and say, that's a very hard argument to argue against.
But is he also rationalizing?
I don't know. I believe it's actually just a very honest look at what is the necessary requirements to build a system that actually creates the result you want.
Okay. Austin's an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. That's not rationalizing. That's how fast this is moving, and the system that you need to be able to innovate to how fast these opportunities are going. It needs to be flexible to move.
Sure, but which business owner in the history of life has ever wanted to have unions?
Agreed.
Yeah,
but take unions out of it.
Yeah,
right. Henry Ford wanted his workers to be successful.
Yeah,
because he wanted them to be customers of his car company. Right? Unions, it had nothing to do with unions. He just saw there was an alignment between healthy workers and a healthy business. And many very enlightened entrepreneurs see the exact same thing. This is where I was commenting on this idea that some of these Bitcoin bonds we could create at the municipal level, I actually believe would be funded not only by Bitcoiners who want to see the spread of Bitcoin and support Bitcoin, but some of the richest billionaires out there, because they actually believe in America.
Totally.
They love America. They believe in the American spirit. They're just left between two horrible options, right? Austerity and corruption and cronyism on one side, and tax the rich to hand out to the poor, and social subsidies and these progressive things that make them the enemy of the people for being successful on the other side. And when you're given those two options, it's very, very easy to say, you know what? I'm just going to take my money and I'll invest in both parties and I'll keep them arguing and I'll go about creating the future I want. And we need to give those people another option. And Bitcoin is that other option, which is you can directly invest in the American people. You can directly invest in the Indian people, because I don't believe this is an American-only issue. You can go to El Salvador and directly invest in El Salvadorians or, any other country, right? We've seen, billionaires in Mexico adopt Bitcoin and start talking about how, we need to move Mexico away from the cartels by creating the same type of economic liberation that we're seeing the hope or the promise, or hopefully the start of, in other Latin American countries. We're seeing the same thing happen in Africa. So, naturally entrepreneurs, when they're given a better option, are usually really, really good in recognizing how to lean into that better option and go, kind of full speed ahead without a lot of distractions. That's the mark of a successful entrepreneur.
And that's why it's wildly exciting, because that option is there right now. Capital is starting to understand that option and realizing that free market, all of those ideas competing are as going, and those ideas, training somebody versus having a product that is like Palm Pilot and the iPhone, pretty similar 10 years. It just, the technology changed, and then all of a sudden we couldn't live without it. Is there any instruction manual to your iPhone?
No.
It's all of a sudden when the UX and the technology hits a point where it drives a free market, you have a massive new industry exploding, and capital chases that new industry. And that's what's happening on Bitcoin right now. It's still early, but that's actually why it's so exciting.
I remember trying to teach my mother how to do the Palm Pilot letters, because I was so excited to get her on the Palm Pilot, and it ended up in her drawer, and she was like, never used it, because the idea of doing the manual and having to learn the new scratch letters, it was just totally beyond her. Whereas,
and so that so a lot of people are looking.
She'll jump all over the internet and be able to use the latest technology because she wants to be on eBay.
Yeah.
And it's so easy that there's no barrier there anymore.
So people are looking through Bitcoin today. When a lot of people are looking through Bitcoin and saying, "Oh, it's hard. It's not a lot of people are using it." That tells you the use cases that are coming.
Yep.
It tells you what entrepreneurs are going to go solve and create incredible businesses by making that easier and onboarding the millions, the tens of millions, hundreds of millions that don't already have it.
Amazing. Whew. It's a lot to digest here. Is there anything else either you want to talk about before we finish up?
The only I'm actually going to do a small plug.
No, do it, please. God, I always take your time.
Some details are going to be emerged, but I was recently talking with a bunch of Bitcoiners about this whole idea that Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing department.
We're all the marketing department.
We are all part of the marketing department, but that opens it up the same way Bitcoin can be used by people you hate, and it's actually made stronger. Oftentimes, that's not true when it comes to Bitcoin marketing, in the sense of the press loves to latch on to some of the worst parts of the Bitcoin marketers or stories, whether that's from shitcoiners, whether or not that's from people who, love to stand up and say, something that's very inflammatory that allows Bitcoin to be demonized. And so, just a bunch of Bitcoiners, a bunch of people that I've been talking to recently got the idea of an underserved area, I think, is the ability for art. Some of the things we've seen with Bansky, some of the, very Satoshi-like, the idea that art can actually be a vehicle to invite people in, to ask better questions. And so we're going to be doing a lot of stuff around Bitcoin interactive public art coming up over the next year.
Love it.
And I would, at one point I'll throw it up on my Twitter. I'll, lend my name to it and actually say I'm supporting some of these projects. But I really love the idea that we as a community can start to think about the mark we leave. And that can include like institutions and things like art. Because I think there are some communities, whether or not that promotes financial education, financial awareness, there are so many opportunities for us to actually get out there and start making our mark and using some of the benefits, the wealth accumulation, that is so timely right now. And so that's kind of my hope is that over the next couple of years, a lot of these incredible benefits that Bitcoin has brought to us, or some of us who were there early, that we begin to look at Bitcoin has been so good to us. How do we be good to Bitcoin back? And I almost feel like it's kind of a moral obligation for me to figure out what can I do for Bitcoin in a way that, kind of pay it forward for what it's done for me. And so things like supporting initiatives in El Salvador. I also am an investor in a whole bunch of Bitcoin only venture capital funds. I have the privilege of being able to do that. And I did enough venture capital that I feel I'm good. Everyone is going to find their way. I'm not saying you have to be an artist. You have to choose our way. But I really invite people, if Bitcoin's been good to you, start looking for ways to be good to Bitcoin back.
I totally agree. Anything you want to plug while you're here?
Nope, no plug.
Just buy Jeff's book. Yeah. The Price of Tomorrow, available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any good bookstore. One of the best books.
The Spanish version, by the way, is coming out very shortly.
Yeah,
amazing.
And it will be free. Online for free.
Yeah.
We will share that in the show notes. This an absolute pleasure. I am honored to have the chance to sit down with you both and call you friends and have your ear outside of the podcast whenever I reach out to you. An absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Austin. I guess we should go and get a beer.
Awesome.
Thank you. We really appreciate it, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
I do.
I do too.